Hello, arty peoples, and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy and I'm your host this evening, and tonight is all about varnishing, specifically varnishing oil paints. Now, just a side note for all of you, and I probably will have to repeat this throughout the show because I know people are going to be asking. Varnishing oil painting and varnishing all the other things like acrylics and pastels and all of that are very different. There are different steps and different processes for the two categories. Well, I'm splitting them into two categories. There are multiple, but I am specifically separating oil painting varnishing today. So today's show is only about oil painting varnishing. Now, I am going to be going over the other varnishing types, not next week, but the week after, so in 2 weeks, because there's just a very different process, and I wanted to make sure to keep it separate and different and on a different show. So make sure to kind of join me back it's going to be episode 205 in 2 weeks for the varnishing of acrylics and other types of artwork. But today, oil paintings. So there's a lot to cover, just so you do know anything I use throughout the show. If you are interested in checking it out, go to the website jerrysartorama.com, and in the search bar at the very top, type in the code JL203, and the teacher's cart should come up with all the different items of what I'm using. Now, if there's anything that I've missed or anything I need to pop back in there, I'll make sure to do that at the end of the show in case I grab something that's unique or something I haven't thought about beforehand. But I will make sure that everything is in that teacher's cart for you guys to check out. So that way you can shop that way and kind of get some more information off of our website. Now, with oil painting varnishing, the first step, I guess, is to ask you why would you varnish? The main huge reason is to protect your artwork. Once you are finished with an oil painting, you do want it to stand the test of time. You want to make sure that if it's in a house that, heaven forbid, there is a fire, even if it's a small fire, that smoke damage is going to damage your painting. It'll get some kind of like a nasty haze on it. The smoke will actually damage it, even if it's not actually caught on fire. So varnishes are a way to kind of give you a protective kind of layer over top of your oil paints, and it can be removed off and then reapplied at a later time. Now, the other reason to apply a varnish to your oil paintings is to kind of even out some of the surfaces. Now, with that being said, it can only go so far. If your oil paintings are what's called sunken in, and it's got matte patches and glossy patches, if the surface differences are really, really great and very different between one and another, you do need to make sure you take care of that and kind of bring those the surfaces back to kind of a similar sheen before you varnish, because your varnish is going to actually amplify those differences, and it's going to be very hard to kind of hide and make it go away. So one way of doing that is called oiling out, and that's where you actually just apply a thin layer of like a drying oil, like a linseed, walnut, or poppy oil. Those are the main drying oils that you want to apply to your paintings. They will bring your darkest darks back down and kind of make them nice and deep. They'll bring your lightest lights back up, and it'll kind of even out the tone of your whole canvas. Now, you don't have to oil out the entire thing, just the matte areas that kind of get lost and get a little hazy almost, over time. You might notice that happening to your paintings. The only other way of getting those surfaces to kind of come back to the same sheen is called a retouch varnish, which I will go over in just a minute, and I'll show you kind of how to do that. But before you do any of this, the biggest thing though is dry time. When would you actually varnish your paintings? Now, oil paintings will be touch dry anywhere between, if you use a drying agent, it might be touch dry the next day because you're applying it in very thin layers. It might be touch dry in 14 days if it's a little bit thicker. Your oil painting is not dry. It's not, well, it might be touch dry, but it's not cured. Cured is the actual thing that you're really looking for. So cured paintings take anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. I know that's insane, right? But the issue being is that oil paintings, because it has all the oils mixed into it, it actually dries through oxidation. It's not like acrylics There's no water for it to evaporate. Your oils actually have to oxidize through the oxygen in the air hardens the oil, and that's how it cures. So that does take about 6 months at the very, very bare minimum. Now I know you might be thinking, I can't wait that long. I have to either get my painting in a show, or I have someone purchasing my painting and I need to ship it off to them. Once your painting is touch dry, there are some options for you guys out there. Again, the retouching varnish is a good one. And then there are things like Gamfar, and I'll go over that as well. But they will allow you to varnish your work before it's officially cured, because the retouch varnish and the ones like Gamfar are flexible and they still allow your oil paints to breathe. So that way, when your oil paints do slightly shift, if you have a very, very hard varnish on it, like a Damar resin, that's going to crack and it's going to look awful. The other ones, the retouch varnish and the Gamfar, will actually flex with it, and it'll allow it to kind of move and shift and dry and still cure while also being protected. So that way, when you send it off to your client, all you have to say is, hey, listen, it's not fully cured. It's going to be okay to ship it over to you. Just make sure that in 6 months to 2 years, depending on how thick you paint, I'm going to need you to ship it back. I'll even pay for it. Put that in the cost of your artwork, by the way. And then make sure to do that final resin varnish layer, or even have somebody that you trust and know in their area that could maybe do the final varnish for them. Now, with that being said, let's go over materials officially that I'm going to be showing you, because we're going to be talking about prepping your canvas and the different types of varnish. So let's go over the types of varnish first. Other than a retouching varnish, there's traditional varnishes. There's a traditional and there's synthetic varnish. Traditional being a Damar or a mastic varnish, and those are what is considered a soft varnish. They actually will dissolve in turpentine and solvents like that. We used to have them, they used to come in just huge chunks of crystals, and you could dissolve it in turpentine and make your own. And that way you could actually create your own solvent if you really wanted to. You can still do that. Just take some time. The other type of traditional varnish is copal or amber. Now those are what's considered a hard varnish. Those do not dissolve in turpentine or any other kind of solvents. You actually have to put them in oil and you have to heat it up, which is a whole process. Besides the fact that it's a whole process, they are actually really hard to find because they are a natural material, and we're kind of using it all up, and just like other natural materials, it's kind of becoming harder and harder to find. Now, even that being said, you can still find a few of them already pre-made, but for the most part, you're gonna usually see Damar varnish. That's kind of the normal varnish these days, because it's so easily used and it's easily made, and it also doesn't resin or yellow as bad over time like the copal and amber would, but it does still yellow over time. So that's why it's important that you can actually remove it and then put it back on. So I have a couple here today, and now there are so many types of resins and varnishes out there. I keep saying resin. It's Damar resin, and usually that's what varnish is a resin dissolved in a solvent. So that's why if I keep saying resin, I'm sorry. That's what I mean. But usually there are so many different types of varnishes out there. These are just a few, because if I tried to show you everything, we'd be here for like 14 hours and my moderators would kill me. But just a couple to kind of show you, just to give you a basis of an idea of kind of a starting point. I have the Chelsea Classical Studio. They have a retouching varnish and a Damar varnish, just like I was saying. Now, the Damar varnish and the retouching varnish are pretty much the same thing. I know, that's confusing, right? Damar varnish is Damar crystals, and the solvent in this is actually the lavender spike oil. Now there's no carcinogens, hard to say, carcinogens in the lavender spike oil. So this is actually okay for you to breathe. Granted, there's still a smell associated with this, so you are very sensitive to smells like Frida is. Make sure you take proper precautions. You do want to make sure you're in a ventilated space, and if you are very, very sensitive to smells like that, some kind of a covering. So either a respirator or some kind of a mask. But that's just, I'm not a very sensitive person when it comes to smells and things like that, so I don't particularly have that on me right now, but I know Frida's gonna mask up once I open these.
Well, and even if you're not sensitive to smells, you probably still want to follow all those safety precautions.
Yes, and that's a very good point. Thank you, Frida. Make sure when you do varnish things, absolutely read the labels. Go to the manufacturer's website, go to our website. In the actual page where you can buy the materials, there should be a little page icon, and it's our tech notes, and I believe it's yellow. Am I right on that? Is it yellow? I believe it's yellow. Yes. It's a yellow button that looks like a little page of paper. That's called our tech notes. That will have any kind of information that you need as far as like the MSDS sheets, where it comes to making sure you keep yourself protected for if it's going to be anything with ventilation that you need to know, or if it's something that will actually react to your skin. That's specific things that you want to make sure you look for. Every varnish is different, so I'm not going to give you specific things to make sure that you do with each specific one. I just really want you guys to be aware that you need to look for those things. If you are very sensitive to it, make sure you wear gloves, wear a respirator, make sure you do all those things that are going to protect yourself, because you're important and we want to make sure that you keep yourself safe. With that being said, so back to before I got sidetracked, sorry. The Damar varnish and the retouching varnish, they are the same thing. Damar is the Damar crystals and the lavender spike oil. And the Damar crystals will actually dissolve in the spike oil, which is great. Retouching varnish is the same thing, but there's less Damar in it. That's why it kind of allows the varnish layer to be flexible, because the Damar varnish or the Damar crystals are a very rigid resin. So once it actually is on your painting, it can crack if your painting is not fully cured. But when it's so diluted, like a retouching varnish, that's when it has that flexibility, which is pretty cool. So you can actually make your own retouching varnish if you get the Damar varnish and the spike oil. So you can actually dilute this, but it's already pre-mixed in case you need it and you don't want to have to do the ratios and things like that. So that's the two Chelsea Classical Studio mediums. Now I did actually do a test. Now just to kind of show you what I started off with, it's just a universal primed linen panel. Every single one I've done the exact same. So it had a, I believe this was acrylic down at the bottom, which is why you might see a slight change in the color. Yeah, you can see it on the screen there. So there was a strip of black here. This is usually what I do with my swatches. And then this was just the linen as it was. And then I put a coat of the Lucas 1862 Blue Black oil paints on here. I wanted a really dark color so you guys could see the differences in the varnish. So that's how I actually prepped my panels. This has just the oils on it, and that's it. With the retouching varnish and the Damar varnish. Now let's actually, maybe we switch to either the overhead or the dynamic here so you guys can really see the differences in the sheen. There we go. You guys can actually, I'm going to rotate these just a little bit so you can see this right here is the Damar, and it's super shiny. And this is the retouching varnish. So it still has a nice sheen to it, but it's not as shiny as that the Damar. So this will give you a nice sheen, and it actually deepens your color. As you can see, it makes it nice and dark. But this will still allow your paints to fully cure and give it that flexibility that you're going to need while it's still curing. But it still gives it a nice finish. Now, side note for everybody who's looking at these, it's really dusty here in the studio, and I tried my best to remove the dust from these guys. It's still got a lot of dust. That's the other thing you do need to make sure when you do varnishing. Be in a dust-free environment as much as possible. Even if you need to put something over top of this. I was actually thinking of one of those huge storage Rubbermaid kind of bins, like the hard plastic ones, and I was just gonna like pop it on top of here just to make sure that no dust or anything can settle while this varnish is curing. So that is if you actually do see there's little bits of dust in these. Now, that I can get off because I know this is removable. I can absolutely take that varnish layer off if I need to, but it's gonna take a lot of elbow grease for me to get all those little bits of dust out of there. And if I were to varnish a piece and have that dust settle on top of my surface, it would drive me crazy. I would feel really awful if I were to send a painting to a client like this. It would just be something that I would feel very unprofessional if I did that. So that's one of those things that you guys want to make sure you watch out for. Now, do we have any questions before I move on officially from the Chelsea Classical Studios? I think we're good.
I have some retouching varnish questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys have retouching varnish, I do have another retouching varnish, but while we have the questions, send them over.
Excuse me. Brooke would like to know if the retouching would work on thick oil paint.
Now, Brooke is asking if the retouching varnish would work on thick oil paint. Yes, that is a very good time to be using your retouching varnish, specifically because thick oil paint takes a lot longer to cure as opposed to a really thin layer if you're working in like glazes with a dryer. Now, if you use something like a painting butter, like the Lucas has, it's not only an impasto medium for your oil paints, so you can have that nice thickness to your paints, but it is also a dryer, so it will cure your oil paints a lot faster. So whether or not you're using a drying agent or you're just using paint straight out of the tube and you're putting it on like it's an icing on a cake with a, maybe a pipette bag, everyone has different ways that they work, and it always depends on what you're doing and the environment that you're doing it in and the humidity of the room that you're working in. And it's always kind of there are so many variables that will change the dry time of your paints. So you have to kind of experiment and make sure that if you have something that you want to start doing for your professional work, maybe do a small panel like this, put your really thick paints on there and see what the retouching varnish will do. I always encourage you guys to test this on a small, non-important piece before you commit to putting it on something that you absolutely love. So retouching varnish, though, absolutely is great for those thicker paintings because it will still have that flexibility to let your paint cure over the time that it needs to fully cure. Any other questions on that?
We've had a couple questions about like drying times of water mixable oils.
Water mixable oils.
It should
Okay.
be the same.
It is the same. So you guys are asking questions about the dry time of water mixable oils. Now, water mixable oils are still oil paints. They still have that oil in them that still needs to fully cure. It still has the same kind of idea that it's going to take anywhere between 6 to 12 months or even up to 2 years, depending on how thick and how juicy your paints are. If you mix in oils into them and then you paint really thick, it's going to still take a really long time for them to cure, even though they're water mixable. They just think of them more as like it's an oil paint that happened to have a water emulsion mixed into it, so that way your solvent can be water instead of turpentine or any other kind of like a harsh chemical. that still has no change on your actual dry time because that oil still has to oxidize, if that makes any sense. Any other questions? While I'm taking questions? Okay, so this is the Chelsea Classical Studio. If you guys have any other questions about these, feel free to shoot them over. But that was those two. Now, I wanted to show you guys the Lucas brand. We have 3 different kinds that we offer as far as the varnishes. We have a Damar varnish, which is just like the Chelsea Classical Studio, only this one has the Damar crystals, and they are dissolved into, I believe, a turpentine. Now, if you're ever not 100% sure, read your labels. This is, yes, Damar and turpentine. Now, your thinner for this would then be turpentine, whereas the Chelsea Classical Studio is a spike oil, so that way you would want to use spike oil for that and then turpentine for this. Now, I am a huge advocate for use the same solvent in these that is already there, because when you start mixing the different solvents is when you start getting kind of tiptoeing that edge of having chemical reactions that are, it's not predictable, and it can become an issue and possibly spontaneously combust. So make sure you just to read the label. It will always tell you what's in there, and it's not hidden information. This is turpentine, so use turpentine. Don't start mixing in random other things, you know? But that's what this one is. Now, actually, I can show you. That is the retouching varnish. Damar. Here's the Lucas Damar. Okay, and just like the Chelsea Classical Studio, here, I'll show you. They're both very shiny, and they both get that really deep, beautiful color. And the other thing I wanted to make sure to kind of show you, because I didn't actually put the blue-black Lucas oil paints on here completely perfectly on there. I wanted to leave those brush strokes so you guys could actually see. Can we go to the dynamics so we can maybe get like a side? That might even be better. There we go. You guys can see the difference in the color. It just looks so much deeper over here. But I wanted to show you because I didn't actually put this on with like a solid coat, so there's some variation in the color, and you can see kind of some of those lighter tones coming through. But over here, so I'm trying to make sure that there's not a glare, it just deepens the color and gives you such a nice finish. It's hard to kind of, yeah, and you can see I got something on the panel. This is where you gotta kind of be careful. If you have something on your panel and you do not remove it, it is now going to be stuck in there. So that's just something you guys want to be watching out for. So yes, this is the Lucas, and as you can see, they're very similar. The main difference being is that the solvent in each of these, but they are still Damar crystals, so it'll give you a nice shiny finish.
If you add cold wax to your oil paints, does that change the way you need to varnish or anything like that?
Cold wax is great. It is one of those things that you can actually use cold wax directly on top of your panel, but you have to kind of put it on and then buff the ever-living bejesus out of it because it otherwise is going to give you a weird haze on your panel or on your painting. And if you have any kind of texture, you do run the risk of actually knocking off your texture, depending on how textured you get. I did have a friend of mine who had literally using a pipette bag, so there were spikes and all kinds of different funky textures on the panel, and if they had put cold wax in that, that would have been a nightmare because it would have gotten into all those little grooves and things like that. So just mind that. Now, cold wax is still wax, and it is still sticky, and so it will kind of be a magnet for dust and different things, and it does kind of have like a layer that kind of cures on top of it. But I would say as far as varnishing cold wax, it should probably be about the same process. I don't think that it would change. Now, I haven't actually done that myself, so that would be something that I would need to experiment with, or I would have it on a small panel like this and I would test it. But I don't think it would actually change the way that you would need to varnish your actual work. Any other questions on that? Okay. Now so that's the Damar varnish. This right here is the picture varnish, which is again similar to the Damar, but this is a different type of resin and mineral spirits. So with this one, if you need to thin this down, you would want to use a mineral spirit instead of a turpentine. So this one though, and this one I actually messed up kind of on purpose. So you can see the differences between the Damar and the picture varnish. This is a glossy picture varnish, and it is, I think it's just ever so slightly glossier. I'm trying to like tilt it to where you guys can see this. Now with this though, I did actually leave, push these back a little bit, I left a hair in there, and a little chunk of dirt as well. So can you see that? Yeah. If you do not remove the hairs while you are varnishing, it is gonna be in there forever. Well, unless you actually remove the whole varnish layer, which is a whole process, and then revarnish your whole painting, which, trust me, just pick out the hairs while you're at it. You don't want to do this. Now, even if I were to sit here and try to pick this little hair out, I probably could. I'd probably use like an X-Acto blade and just kind of scrape it until I got that hair out of there. But even if I did that, the little groove where that hair is would still be visible, and it would still be there unless you were to like legit remove the entire layer of varnish, and then you have to revarnish the whole thing, which is a process again. So I wanted to make sure to show you that just whilst you are varnishing, and we'll go over the whole process of how to actually varnish, but make sure you keep an eye out for little hairs, because that's the thing with brushes. Sometimes the hairs come out and it's okay, especially when they're nice soft bristle brushes that you want for varnishing. Sometimes the hairs just fall out. You just need to keep an eye on that and make sure you remove them. The last one that we have here is the retouching varnish for Lucas, and again I believe that is, I'm never going to be able to pronounce this, aldehyde resin, aldehyde? I think that's how you say it, and mineral spirits. So this is actually very similar to the picture varnish as opposed to the Damar varnish, but again it's going to have less of the resin in there and more of the solvent. So it's not as shiny. I'm trying to, there we go. But it still deepens your colors and gives you a nice finish. And it kind of brings everything to a nice sheen and gives you that still protective layer that will keep dust and everything from getting really on your painting. Because just remember, oil paints, as they cure, that oil is still kind of sticky, so it becomes kind of a magnet for dust and all kinds of dirt, which is frustrating. But that's the different types of the Lucas. Again, I'm going to try and tip them here. Keep them in the same order. There we go. So that way you guys can see the differences between just the raw canvas with just the oil paints and how that changes your surface. Right? Alright, so that's the Lucas. And last but not least, I have something that is relatively confusing, because I'm going to pretty much just break all the rules that I just told you. Alright, so Gamvar. Gamvar is, now I remember how I said that there are traditional varnishes. They are Damar or mastic, copal, or amber. Those are the typical traditional varnishes for oil painting. There's also a synthetic varnish. These are in the synthetic range. In the teacher's card, I also included the Liquitex Soluvar. These are the two that actually kind of tiptoe in the realm of oils and acrylics. And I know I said acrylic varnishing is going to be in 2 weeks, and we'll go over this with that too. But as far as oil paintings are concerned, these are similar to a retouching varnish where you can actually put them on before your painting is fully cured. And to be completely honest, I think these are probably the easiest to not mess up. If you are just starting out and just starting to get into varnishing your paintings, these actually have a longer work time than, say, a Damar varnish. So these don't cure as fast, and because a Damar varnish gets sticky real fast, and you do not want to go over it several times because then it can get hazy and cloudy, and then if you introduce bubbles into it, it becomes a whole thing, and it's frustrating. These actually are a little bit easier to work with, but it's just a personal preference. So you might notice I have 2 bottles, but I have 3 panels, right? This right here is the matte, and as you can see, it is fully matte, and it's still got a beautiful finish to my painting, my just single color painting, but I can still see those beautiful colors, or the one color, but I can see the different tones kind of coming through, but it is a flat matte finish, which is beautiful if that's your personal preference. Now this is the gloss, and it is just like the Damar, super shiny and pretty and gives you a beautiful luster. Now Gamvar also offers a satin, which you would think is this one. I did not actually get a satin. I made it. So if you actually do mix your matte and your gloss varnishes together, you can actually make your own satin finish. The reason why I prefer that to buying the satin myself is because I can control how glossy or matte the satin is, which is kind of nice. Now, if you don't want to mix it and you want to just go ahead and get a satin finish, go ahead and grab it. It's in the teacher's cart. You can go grab it that way. It's super easy to, just pour out and go. These, if I want something that is a little bit more towards the glossy side, which is my personal preference, I do about maybe like instead of like a half and half ratio, I probably do like 1/3 to 2/3. And maybe even, that's probably being a little generous. I might go somewhere in between there, like 5/8. But it's not a perfect science. I haven't ever really measured it out. I usually eyeball it, but that's just because I've been using these for so long. But with these though, you can put them on your oil paintings before they are fully cured and they are touch dry. Make sure that they are still touch dry though. The other kind of synthetic synthetic varnishes that are out there are MSA, which I think stands for Mineral Spirit Acrylic, I believe. And then the Soluvar, which is made by Liquitex, which is really nice. Now the Soluvar though, I believe you need to make sure is 100% cured. You cannot put it on like these guys before it is fully cured. So those are similar to the other varnishes that I was showing you. You have to make sure that you wait the 6 months to possibly 2 years, depending on your painting. So that way you don't have that flexibility cracking your varnish, which is frustrating. So before I officially show you guys how to varnish, do we have any questions? I feel like we do on the different types of varnishes that we have.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
First is, when do you choose a matte over shiny? Is it all just personal preference?
Yes, pretty much. In case you didn't hear Frida, she was asking, when do you choose a matte finish over a shiny finish? It is personal preference. If I have a client who wants a matte finish, I'm going to give them a matte finish. If it's my own personal preference, I'm just putting it on a painting that I made that is not actually commissioned for anything, and it was my own, just I wanted to do it, I'm going to do the in-between, and I'm going to do the satin, which would probably lean more towards the gloss. But I don't want a full gloss just because, personally, it frustrates me when I have a painting on the wall and you have that glare from all the lights. That is my own personal thing. If that doesn't bother you and you like that shiny, that's totally okay too. It's entirely personal preference, really. Now the other question?
The second question is from Nola, and you'll probably actually get into this in a minute, but she's asking how many coats you would give in any of those varnishes.
The different coats for different varnishes usually depend on the type of varnish you get. The best thing to do is to read your labels. The process for applying the different varnishes in different brands can vary. For the most part, you would do anywhere between 2 to 3 coats depending on what type of varnish you have and the luster that you're looking for. If you're using a spray varnish, you might do anywhere between 20 to 50. And I don't have any spray varnish on the table here. There are spray varnishes for oil paintings. You do need to make sure that they specifically say oil painting varnish that is in an aerosol can. But I don't ever really like those. My own personal preference, again. I don't like the look of it, but you typically do want to do anywhere between 2 to 3 coats if you're using a brush application. Got another question?
I do.
Okay, what you got?
Tracy on Facebook says, if you have varnished with a satin and it's not quite what you want, can you apply a gloss on top of it to bring it up a bit?
Okay, now in case you didn't hear that, I'm sorry, Brittany? Who was it saying that?
Tracy.
Tracy, a different Y name. Tracy was asking if you put a satin varnish down on your painting and you don't like the finish, can you then apply a different type of finish to your painting? So if you wanted to make it a little bit more glossy and you apply that on top of this, absolutely yes, you can do that. Now I would stick within the same brand of varnish. So if you have a satin Gamvar and then you have a gloss Gamvar and you want to make it just a little bit more glossy because you mixed it and it wasn't quite what you wanted, because I literally did that to this one. I accidentally put too much matte varnish in here for the first coat. And then I was like, whoopsie daisies. And then I mixed it up again. And I actually paid attention to my ratios a little bit more. And I put the right amount and I did a second coat. Now, it's still a nice protective coat on your painting. It's just that final finish is now what I'm looking for. It doesn't affect the adhesion or anything, but for the most part, you can definitely change that luster between them, but I would stick within the same brand. Just so that way, if you ever need to remove it, you're not removing one with one solvent and then you have one that takes a different solvent because it might not quite dissolve properly with the first removal, and then you get into the different layers and it's going to be frustrating down the road. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions before I move on to how you actually do this? I think we're good. All right, so the one thing I did not actually show you guys, excuse me, are brushes. Now, I do have a couple different kinds here, and I wasn't actually going to show you this one, but I'll get into why I grabbed it last minute. So we have my personal preference, and I'm gonna pet this the entire time I'm up here because it's so soft. I have had friends of mine get those really cheapo chip brushes that, I mean, you can find them at the hardware store for like $1, and that's what they use to varnish their paintings. The bristles on those are so rough and they fall out and it's not a good brush. And it's really frustrating to see that. I would just like to impart to you guys to invest in a varnish brush. Now, if you take care of these, they will last you a very long time. But you do need to invest in a nice varnish brush, please. The varnish brushes are always going to be extremely soft. Like it's, I feel like I'm petting like a soft, fluffy bunny. This is not bunny hair, by the way, just in case you guys were wondering. But it's going to be very, very soft. Now, I like, personally, a brush that has a nice snap to it. That's my own personal preference. But if you have something like this, it's going to have a little less snap than this one. And the bristles are also a little bit shorter. So it's all personal preference on how it actually moves across the canvas for you. But there are several different types. Now, the one that I was showing you before is the New York Central Colossus brush. Now, these are the two different sizes, 35 millimeter and 50. Depending on the size of your painting, use the right tool for your painting as well. I'm not going to do a 30 by 40 painting and varnish it with this brush. I'd be there forever, and I'd probably cry along the way. You want to use something that makes sense. And at the same time, you also don't want to move slowly. Well, there's a fine line. I'll get into that when we start actually applying. But you definitely want to use the right tool for the right painting. So if you have a smaller painting, you can use a smaller brush. If you have a larger one, get a bigger one. But you do want something that's nice and soft, because that doesn't leave behind those brush marks. And it usually, a nice varnish brush isn't going to fall apart on you, and you're not going to have to sit there and pick out all the little bristles along your painting, because it's going to ruin it. And then if your damar starts setting and getting sticky, and then you're trying to rush and it becomes a whole thing, and no one needs that anxiety. Get a good brush. Now, the other brushes that I have here, I got every size so I can show you guys. It goes from 3-inch all the way down to 1-inch, and the 1/2-inch size as well. This is the Creative Mark glazing brushes. They are nice and soft as well. Nice fluffy, but they are a flat, I kind of like this, the way that it feels in my hand. It's like a flat paddle brush, but they actually lay across your paintings really nicely. So if I have a big painting I want to do, this nice flat 3-inch brush is going to be fantastic. Now, as with all brushes, even other brushes that you use for your oil paintings, watercolors, acrylics, anything, always make sure you wash your brush before you officially use it, please. The reason why is because when manufacturers send these out into the world, they actually have a coating of like a starch on them. The reason why is because that protects your brushes in the actual transportation process, and it keeps your bristles stiff and in the right kind of format. So that way, when it's in a box being shipped across wherever, it doesn't bend, and then all of a sudden you receive your brush and it's looking like this. You know, it's going to be a nice pristine bristle because it has that starch kind of holding it together. You don't want to get that starch into any of your supplies. You just need to wash it with like a soap and water is usually easy enough. If you have a brush cleaner, that also works. But for the most part, you always want to wash your brushes before you officially use them. But those are the two different types of brushes that I was initially going to show you. Now, I actually grabbed this Berlin Mottler. I always forget there's an L in there. Not a Motter, it's a Mottler. I grabbed the Berlin Mottler brush. This is a 2-inch. It actually comes in all different sizes as well. But I grabbed this last minute because I forgot. In the process of prepping your painting for varnish, you need to kind of clean it. Now, there's a whole thing with cleaning paintings. First and foremost, please do not rub food on your paintings. Bread, who started this? The inside of the bread, yes, will remove dust from your painting, but you are now inviting all of the bugs. I've also heard potatoes sometimes being rubbed on a painting. I don't know why this started, and I don't know how. Stop rubbing food on your paintings. It's not a good idea. Now, just to kind of show you a quick example, this is a painting I did, well, a sort of dual painting I did in college. I'm not going to date myself, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how long it's been since I actually did this, but it's been years. Now this actually was just in my studio, which is at the end of a wood shop, and the wood shop doors were left open, and the dust and sawdust and all of the dirt and everything kind of flew all over my studio and got all over this. Now this is where I take a nice stiff bristle brush like this, and then all I have to do to clean it is to just dust it off. I already did that with these guys, so I know they're already dusted. But for the most part, that's all you really need to do. Now, granted, if I had hung this up in my kitchen and I had, you know, food cooking in there and that maybe some of the oils from cooking splattered on it, or, you know, my kid decided to go crazy with spaghetti and flung it all over the painting and I want to clean it off. Technically speaking, you can just take a nice, I usually use Easy Wiper because it's a nice cotton rag. And if it's really not that big, maybe just a touch of water and just try to like get it off there. Now granted, this painting has been dry and cured forever. It's 100% dry. I would not do that with a fresh painting. If it's a fresh painting, just let it sit. And then once it's officially cured, maybe go back with a little bit of water and try to buff it off. And that's only if it's something that's like really gunky and got like splattered on there. Now, with that being said, I actually did try to do some research into what is the best way to clean your paintings before you officially varnish. And I did find one guy who has a friend who is a art restorer. His name is Andrew, how do you say his last name? Tischler? Tischler. Andrew Tischler. He does have his own YouTube channel. He is a wealth of information, and you guys should definitely go check him out. He's an awesome painter as well. But he has a friend who is a restorative, that's I guess their job, art restorer. Conservator. That's the word. Thank you, Katie. They said the best solution to clean your paintings with, now I have not tried this, and if you're going to try this, I would also recommend testing it out, because I'm going to have to try this out, and I'll let you guys know how it goes. But ammonium hydroxide, not to be confused with ammonia, it is not the same thing. Ammonium hydroxide is essentially ammonia that's been chemically introduced to water, so they do actually chemically change the ammonia into an ammonium hydroxide. Now, you can buy that, I believe, online. I might have to actually find it and get it shipped in myself. But you might be able to find it in the grocery stores, is what he was saying, depending on where you are. 20 milliliters of that, and you want to dilute it in 250 milliliters of water. Once you have that solution mixed up, you take it, again, a nice, soft, clean cotton rag, dip it in the solution, and like Mr. Miyagi, you wax on and wax off. you take the solution and, you know, just a little bit at a time, rub it on there, get this whatever the dirt and everything off of there, and then take a dry cloth and then get it off. Now, again, I have never done this, and it kind of makes me a little bit nervous because ammonia on my paintings makes my brain scream no. But he said it was a valuable resource, and I feel like I have to test it out. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys that caveat. But if you do have the ability to clean your paintings, and I am going to be testing that out. Yes, we have questions.
So you wouldn't clean the painting by using like isopropyl alcohol or a solvent?
No. I would not use, in case you didn't hear that, I would not use isopropyl alcohol or a solvent to clean my painting. The reason why is because that could remove my painting. Now, if you guys are looking here, this is actually a pencil sketch and a very light wash of, I think it was like burnt umber and a solvent, like a turpentine or something. I'm pretty sure even isopropyl alcohol can remove that because it is so thin and there's not a whole lot holding it on. So that is where I would test it out to begin with, but solvent is going to possibly move your pigments around, so is the isopropyl alcohol. They are literally designed to pick that stuff up. So that's why I wouldn't do that. I would, if anything, I would just use water and a bit of a prayer. Just to try and make sure that I don't remove my oil painting. Now, once you officially clean your painting, even if you just use water, you need to let it dry for 24 hours. The reason why is because if you were to get your canvas wet and then you let it dry for an hour and then you touch it and you're like, oh, it's dry, it's totally fine, you might still actually have some hidden moisture in there. And if you varnish on top of that, you run the risk of actually getting what's called a bloom in your varnish. And it is essentially just like a little cloud, hazy spot where the moisture was trapped, and now it is kind of, think of it like a little cloud underneath your varnish, and it is never coming out unless you remove the varnish, and then you have to redo the whole thing, which is frustrating. So that's why you want to make sure that your painting is completely cured, and if it did get wet in any way, shape, or form, you let it fully dry for like 24 hours. I probably also would not take a hairdryer to it because the heat of that could have an effect on your painting, and that's might be a whole thing as well. Any other questions before I officially jump into this?
How would you recommend to clean and or store your varnish brush?
That again, it always depends on what varnish you are using, but to clean or store your varnish brush, if I have a solvent, or if I have a varnish that is a turpentine base, I'm going to clean my brush with turpentine. If I have a solvent, or I keep saying solvent, if I have a varnish that is spike oil based, I'm going to use spike oil to clean my brush. And then once I get all of that Damar varnish, or whatever the varnish that it is, out of my bristles, I'm going to then take my brush and go wash it with a brush cleaner in my sink. So like if I use the Chelsea Classical Studio Damar varnish, I'm going to use the spike oil to clean it, which is actually what I'm going to do here in a second. And then once I'm done, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to go use that lavender soap to kind of clean it, because it's all in the same realm, and it should all break down the varnish that's in my my brush. Now, side note, sometimes Damar varnish is used as like a medium at the final stages of your paintings. You can absolutely do that. It kind of gives you a nice solid hard shell on your paintings, but it does not become a varnish. It still at that point is now more of a medium, and you should still varnish your paintings at the end once it's fully cured. Other side note, when it comes to cleaning your Damar varnish off your brushes, like for instance, this is my this is actually the brush cleaner, the lavender brush cleaner for Chelsea Classical Studio. And I can use that interchangeably, as instead of using the spike oil to clean off my brush, because this is spike oil based, it's just a lot stronger. After so long, I need to remove this and swap it out for new, because the more Damar that I'm cleaning off in here, I am essentially creating a Damar varnish in my basin here. Same thing when you use Damar as your final stages in your painting. If you're using your brush and you're painting, and then you clean off your brush in your basin with your solvent, whatever base it is, and then after so long, you now have just the Damar varnish in your basin. So just kind of keep an eye on that. I would say, depending on how you use it, maybe every 6 months, just swap it out. If that's, if you use it and don't refill it, and I would say it would take about 6 months to kind of, you want to swap it out for new kind of a thing. Let it settle in your jar. But that's a whole thing. We'll get over that. Maybe on a different show, I think.
Is there an easy way to know when your oil painting is fully dry and cured before you varnish it?
That is the biggest question. Is there an easy way to know if your oil painting is dry and cured? For the most part, no. No, there's not. It's just one of those things that if you paint in really thin glazes, you should be okay after 6 months. If you paint in thicker layers, I would say just as a rule of thumb, give it a year. And I mean, it honestly goes by a lot faster than you would actually imagine, because again, I've had this for several years and I never varnished this. I know I'm terrible, but it's just one of those things that, like, just give it time. It's touch dry and it's hard to tell, and it's just one of those things that you just kind of just give it time. We have another question?
Yes. Carol says, you seem to be saying that if you painted with any turpentine in your medium, you would not use spike oil in the varnish. Is that correct?
All right, if you use turpentine as your medium when you paint, you can use spike oil as a varnish. The reason why is because you would give it 6 months to 6 to 12 months, depending on, or 2 years, depending on how thick you paint, to let it cure. That spike oil is no longer going to react with whatever turpentine that is already in there, because the turpentine will evaporate. The spike oil will then be able to go on, like if you use the Damar varnish on something, and this, I used a turpentine on this way back in the day, because I don't even think this was a thing. This wasn't even ever manufactured at all when I painted this. So this was turpentine based, but the turpentine is long gone. So there's not going to be any interaction between them. That's a very good question, though. Any other questions before I officially... yeah, how are we doing on time? Sorry.
Get the varnishing.
Yes. All right, so I'm going to just varnish one. Now, the other thing I have in my teacher's cart is, and I'll show you the whole stack. These are actually meant for watercolor. And it comes with a nice lid. So there's one that has like a nice dome. Usually I just put that off the side, but I use these upside down. And so it has a little bit of a deeper well down on the bottom side. And so these are meant usually for watercolor, but I usually like them for varnishing just because I don't pour out a ton of varnish and waste it. And at the same time, this is porcelain based, and whatever solvent is in here is not going to interact with whatever cup I have. Now, if I'm doing a huge painting, I will switch to a mason jar, something that is glass that I know, again, won't dissolve. I don't want to use like a plastic solo cup. That would not be good. Or if I'm mixing and using a large painting, I'll mix these two and then put it in my mason jar, and I can even then close it and store it for later. Always label too. The other thing I think I need is just the rag, and that's it. Okay, so I'm going to use probably the 2-inch brush because that feels, maybe we use, 2-inch brush should be good. Now before I start, I am going to just make sure that I very lightly kind of grab my bristles and just gently pull them in case there are any kind of loose bristles coming out of there. I usually that's just my habit, is I walk up to a painting like this every time. And I'm just going to use the Damar varnish. Now, when you apply any kind of a varnish, usually you do want to agitate it just a little bit and kind of flip it upside down. You do not want to shake it because that will introduce air bubbles into your varnish, but the Damar varnish crystals can kind of settle to the bottom, so you do want to just kind of agitate it and get it to kind of move. I did that recently, so I'm not going to shake this or tip it. It's not a shake, it's a tip, a slow tip. I don't want to do that too much because I've already done that recently. So there is, and Frida, you might want to put your mask on just so you don't have any kind of reaction to this. So I can smell this. It's, again, for me, it's a light, kind of a lavender scent. To Frida, it's a headache. So just be aware. I am going to put just a little bit on the end of my brush. And the reason why I like these particular is because I can use the edge and kind of just get off some excess. Now, do not pour your varnish on your painting. You have the risk of you pour too much, you pour too little, and it will puddle, or you won't get it smoothed on in enough time to get it to get a nice, thin, even coat. Now, again, just want to make sure I don't have anything on the surface, right? And then I'm going to start and systematically move either up or down my painting or left to right. I don't want to start in the middle and kind of go out that way. I want to be very systematic about this. So I'm going to try to make sure I get my edges. And I do not want to really overbrush this either. You want to try and brush this on with as little brush strokes as possible. It's not going to hurt you too much to go back and forth a little bit, but you don't want to like scrub it in there, because that will also introduce air bubbles into your varnish, which is frustrating if they dry in there. But you can see already the difference in the color, and it's so lovely.
So satisfying.
Right?
I literally just typed that in the YouTube chat. Question. If
Yes.
you're using the Gamvar glossy and it comes out too glossy,
Yes.
can you mattify it?
Absolutely. If your Gamvar is a little too glossy for your liking, you can absolutely either mix in a satin with the glossy or go over top of it with just the satin itself. I mean, you can make up your own mixture depending, like I told you, I don't buy the satin because I like to control how satin it is. I like mine to be a little glossier than satin. So, sorry, I'm trying to like varnish and talk at the same time. I'm also trying to, just as a side note, trying to make sure that I don't have any puddles and it's still a nice even coat. And I'm also keeping track of whether or not I have any little bristles that come out. Like I think I see one right there. So I'm going to take another brush, let me put this down there, and I'm going to pick that out with the side of my brush, and it just picked it right up. See that? That would have been stuck in there and it would have driven me crazy, but I think that's the only one. And when you use just the side of your brush and just kind of like just gently grab the bristle, it comes right up. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort.
What about fingerprints? If you touch your painting before you varnish it and oils get left on the surface of the painting and then you varnish, will that be super visible?
The oils from your skin shouldn't really be that visible on your paintings. Unless you have like something on your hands, it shouldn't really affect it that much. For the most part, that's fine. Now, if you do notice that you are leaving behind fingerprints, yes, you want to remove them. Otherwise, you do run the risk of it's going to be varnished into your painting and it's going to be visible for the end of time. You definitely want to keep an eye out for that. I think I saw another bristle. I can't tell. Sorry, you might see the top of my head here. I need to just double check. I think it's good. Okay. Alright, getting to the top here. Now, I know the bottom is still wet, and I can still just one last time work my way all the way back down, and I just left a bristle. And I am not applying a whole lot of pressure. I am letting the brush do its job. And I also am not applying a whole lot of varnish. Alright, I think this, I think I have one little bristle right here. And I think that's part of my painting. I think that's from when I actually painted it. But that means it's just going to be varnished in. So there you go. That is 1 coat of varnish. Now, sorry, there's a bit of a glare to it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that off. You can already see the difference. Hold on, let me grab the other one. Because I painted these in the same day. Same class, same 3-hour class. Somehow I got 2 paintings done in 3 hours. But you can see the difference just in the color. So I used the same skin tones and the same color for her hair. And you can see even the background is the same, but just the difference in varnished versus not varnished. And it just makes your painting look so pretty and so luminous, and it's just so lovely. And this is only the first coat. I am going to let this cure, and I would come back and I would do a second coat. Now, the second time that I do the second coat, I would go this way, because I've already done this way. I'm going to go the other direction just to make sure if there are any type of brush strokes that I just left behind, then it's going to be kind of minimal because I'm going the other direction. If you go in the same direction, you actually run the risk of maximizing that brush stroke because you're going to kind of emphasize it a little bit more. Whereas like if you do the crisscrossing, like hatching kind of pattern, it minimizes that. Do we have a question?
We do.
All right.
How do you protect the painting after you varnish it from dust before the varnish is completely dry?
Like I said, in here, it's really dusty. So I'm sitting here going, there's going to be a lot of dust on here. What I kind of want to do is actually grab, we have some storage bins in the back here for the art supplies that we use for the show. And I actually just want to like plop it over top and just make my own little dust-free room for this. The only other way of doing that is to just make sure that you either put it in a room that has very minimal dust or somewhere that can be kind of maintained, like you put something on top of this. Now, you don't want anything touching the surface, you just want to kind of like dome it. That's why I was thinking one of those storage bins that we have, because it's, I believe, larger than this actual canvas, and I would have it just sitting around it. But I wouldn't touch the surface of this until it's fully cured. Any other questions? Officially? I think we're good, right? That was satisfying, wasn't it? Oh, always good to see varnishing. All right, now, how are we looking on time?
You're about 10 minutes over.
Okay, we're about 10 minutes over. All right, so what I'm gonna do real quick, because I use the Chelsea Classical Studio Demar varnish, I have my brush cleaner here, and I'm gonna be cleaning this up here in a minute. The actual varnish, I don't have much left in here. The only thing I would do is actually take a rag, wipe it up, and actually I can do that right now, kind of absorb what's left over. There's not a whole lot, really. Well, if I know it's fully clean, I might be able to actually pour it back in my bottle, especially if there's a good amount in there. That's the other reason why mason jar is really nice, because you can just seal it and then move on with your day. But this Demar varnish, I do want to get out of there. And the final thing that I do is I take a Soho wipe and I wipe it out. Now, before I actually put varnish back in here, if I need to use this again, I will actually make sure to just rinse this off with soap and water. But this is just to kind of get that sticky resin out of here, just so it's not a bowl full of sticky. But that was resin, or well, I keep saying resin. That was varnishing, guys. Before I officially get out of here, any other questions that we have? I know my moderators are very diligently looking at all their screens. I love it. If you guys do have any questions that I did not answer, make sure to put it in the chat below. Or if you watch this in the future on YouTube or even on Facebook, just put it on there, tag me. On the YouTube, I actually keep an eye out for any questions, and I will make sure to answer them for you. But that was varnishing. I hope there's a lot to cover, like I said. And in 2 weeks, I am going to be going over the process for varnishing acrylic paintings and the other types of paintings out there, like oil pastels and different things like that. One quick little update to kind of just make sure to tell you guys, AOC is still happening. Do not forget, Art of the Carolinas is happening, guys. I'm so excited. It's a huge trade show where we have just massive discounts on art supplies. It's here in Raleigh at, I believe, the Hilton?
North Raleigh Hilton Midtown.
North Raleigh Hilton Midtown. It is happening November 12th through the 14th. That is the actual trade show dates where you guys can come and see all different types of demos, use the art supplies hand-on to test it out before you buy it, and also see me bopping around being crazy me. And then there are also workshops, and the workshops do start on the 11th, which is, I believe, a Thursday, so it's that whole weekend. And then we also have the workshops starting the 11th going through the weekend, and I am teaching. So if you guys want to learn from me in person, you can actually come and take my class. So make sure you go to artofthecarolinas.com to check that out. There are also amazing other teachers, so you guys should really just go there and check it all out. It's going to be so much fun. I cannot wait.
Do it sooner than later though, because rooms and classes always sell out.
Yes. Now, Katie's saying, in case you didn't hear her, make sure to look at it now, because the classes and the rooms, if you are actually traveling and staying in the hotel there, book it now because it is always sold out. You guys cannot believe how quickly this sells out. So make sure you look at it now, not later, because you are going to be disappointed if you cannot get in. So that is Art of the Carolinas. But if you do actually have any other varnishing things that you guys want to show me, make sure you tag them on social media. Facebook is our Jerry's Live group. In order to get in, all you have to do is answer one question. Otherwise, you are deemed a robot, and I cannot let you in because Katie won't let me have robots. But otherwise, you can actually talk to me directly at Emmy, host of Jerry's Live Facebook page. And then on Instagram, if you want to tag the Jerry's Artorama, their account, and then there's also my account, which is misscakes.art. And then the code as well, JL203, if you have any varnishing things that you want to share with me, I'd love to see them. But make sure you also join me next week, because instead of the varnishing is in 2 weeks, but next week I have Kevin Greenland coming back on, and he's going to be talking all things golden mediums. The gels, the mediums, all the different textures and the things that we all look at and go, what does that do? All of those are going to be featured next week, so it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you guys have fun, and thank you so much for joining me. Bye!